Welcome back. I'm Dr. Hazel Huang, and in this video, we're going to look at questionnaire design, how to structure a survey that captures the data you need to answer your research questions accurately and credibly. Let's dive in. A professional questionnaire is made up of 5 critical sections: the invitation letter, screening questions, behavioral questions, attitudinal questions, and finally, your demographic questions. Let's start at the very first point of contact, the invitation letter. This letter is your foundation for informed consent, and it matters more than many students realize. You need to explain the study's purpose concisely, but here is something important. Do not disclose your hypotheses, because doing so could bias your responses. The invitation letter is also where you set out the steps you are taking to follow ethics guidelines. Following British Psychological Society guidelines, you must explicitly state that participation is voluntary and that everyone has the right to withdraw at any time. You also need to detail the steps you will take to protect participant confidentiality and well-being. Once participants have agreed to join, the next step is making sure they actually belong to your target population. Screening questions are your filters, and they are vital when you are studying a specific group. You won't always need them, but when you do, they're essential. For example, if your study is designed exclusively for full-time managers, you'd ask about their occupation and managerial responsibilities right at the start to make sure you aren't collecting data from people who don't fit your criteria. Question order matters more than you might expect. It directly affects the integrity of your data. We start with behavioral questions, what people do, because they are objective and relatively easy to answer. Attitudinal questions, what people think and feel, come next, because they require more cognitive effort. And we save demographic questions for the very end. Why? Because asking sensitive questions early can make participants feel uncomfortable or defensive, and that can lead to dropout. This sequence protects both your response quality and your completion rates. Now let's get into what is often the most substantial part of your questionnaire, attitudinal questions. In academic terms, attitudinal questions are usually what we call measurement scales or inventories. Their job is to measure latent variables, psychological attributes that you can't observe directly. Let's look at some examples. Things like brand loyalty, personality, or general well-being are classic examples of latent variables. Because you can't see these constructs, you need standardized tools that have been rigorously developed and tested to measure them reliably. There are 2 types of scales you will use most often in consumer behavior research: Likert type scales and semantic differential scales. Let's take each one in turn. Likert type scales ask participants how much they agree or disagree with a statement. You'll recognize these immediately. Semantic differential scales work differently. They use pairs of opposite adjectives, asking participants to position themselves somewhere between, say, bad and good, or unfavorable and favorable. So how do you find validated measurement scales? The answer is, you go to the literature for every variable in your research framework. For example, the framework you see on screen: social media usage intensity, upward social comparison, self-confidence, and materialism. You need to locate a corresponding measurement scale that has already been tested and validated by other researchers. Google Scholar and Generative AI are great starting points for this. In Google Scholar, search for your variable name alongside the word scale or measure. Look for highly cited articles. These are typically the instruments the field has converged on. Note the source for every scale you use. You'll need to cite it properly in your dissertation. Generative AI tools can help you identify candidate scales quickly. However, always verify any suggestion against the original published source before using it. Never rely solely on an AI-generated description of a scale. Once you have your main variables covered, there is one more important category to consider: control variables. These are factors that might influence your results, even though they are not your primary focus. Things like age, sex, or the reason someone uses social media in the conceptual framework shown earlier. By including them in your questionnaire and your analysis, you can isolate their impact and ensure that the relationships you find between your main variables are genuine, rather than being driven by some background factor you haven't accounted for. This makes your findings more defensible. Before you collect your main dataset, it is well worth pre-testing your measurement items using a technique called cognitive interview. You ask a small number of people to talk through how they are interpreting each question as they answer it. This matters because many validated scales were developed in a different time or cultural context, and some wording may no longer land as intended or may not suit the population you are studying. One important caution: treat suggestions from cognitive interview participants as diagnostic signals, not instructions. Without the theoretical grounding in psychometrics, a well-intentioned rewording can accidentally change what a question is actually measuring. Always evaluate any proposed changes against the underlying theory and discuss them with your supervisor before making any amendments. If your study involves participants who speak a different language, you will need to translate your questionnaire, and there is a rigorous way to do this. The gold standard is translation and back translation. You translate the questionnaire from English into the target language, and then a separate translator, working independently, translates it back into English. Comparing the two English versions reveals any meaning that has been lost or shifted in translation. It is also worth being aware that translation across cultural contexts involves more than just language. Some phrases or concepts in one culture may have no direct equivalent in another, and that is something worth raising with your supervisor. Two useful references for navigating this are shown on the screen. Discuss your approach with your supervisor early, as this step takes more time than most students anticipate. Presentation really does matter here. A clean, well-structured table showing your variables, the scales you have used, their sources, and your reliability statistics signals immediately that you understand what you are doing. It builds trust with your reader before they have even reached your findings. A link to a template table you can adapt for your own dissertation is included below. Use it if you like. It is also worth keeping a simple principle in mind as you work through all of this. Statistics is a garbage in, garbage out process. Your results are only ever as good as the data you put in, and your data is only as good as your questionnaire. Mastering these details is what turns a potentially flawed survey into a rigorous research instrument, and that is what your markers are looking for. We are going to finish with the final component of a questionnaire: demographic questions. In the demographic questions, we need to be careful about collecting special category data. Under the UK GDPR, certain types of personal data are classified as special category data because of their particularly sensitive nature and the heightened risk they carry for individuals if disclosed without consent. These categories are shown on the screen. If your research requires you to collect any of these, for example, if you are asking about participants' ethnicity, religious beliefs, or sex, you have a legal and ethical obligation to handle them with additional safeguards. And this is not something you can sort out after the fact. It is a standard requirement of your ethics application, which you will need to complete and receive approval for before any data collection begins. Your ethics form will ask you to demonstrate exactly how you plan to protect participants when collecting sensitive information. The most fundamental safeguard is straightforward. Always include a prefer not to say option for any sensitive question. Take gender as a good example, one of the most commonly asked demographic questions. Under GDPR, you cannot simply offer a binary male-female option. You need to show inclusivity and respect by including options such as non-binary and prefer not to say. Getting these details right is not just a legal requirement. It is a reflection of the care and rigor you bring to your research. That wraps up our session on questionnaire design. If you found this helpful, be sure to check out our other videos. The best research doesn't just ask questions. It asks the right questions. Keep questioning, and I'll see you soon.